bring to you a short conversation with an expert, a thought leader, a doer in the realm of innovation for the built environment. My name is Jeff Echols. I'm a senior advisor and the head of marketing for Shadow Partners. And today's presentation is an encore of my conversation with Steve Weikal. He's the industry chair of the Real Estate Transformation Lab at MIT. And we talk about built environment transition, BET. I really enjoyed this conversation. I think it's a really good one, especially as we look towards the future of innovation in the built environment. So enjoy this conversation with Steve Weikal, and I'll be back again tomorrow with another Shadow Shorts. All right, welcome back to Shadow Shorts. If we've never met before, my name is Jeff Echols. I am a senior advisor and the head of marketing at Shadow Partners, and we've launched this effort that we call Shadow Shorts so that we can have conversations with the best and the brightest in the world of the built environment, and specifically those that are focusing on innovation in the built environment. And I am pleased to be joined today by Steve Weikal. He is the industry chair of the Real Estate Transformation Lab at MIT, amongst other things, of course. And we were just talking backstage before we went live. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. This is going to be a lot of fun. So Steve, thank you. Welcome. Glad that you're here today.
Thank you, Jeff. I'm delighted to be here as well.
So as we were talking, as we were getting ready, one of the things that we sort of touched on was this idea of built environment transition, or BET. So for those of us that don't know what built environment transition is, what does that mean and what are you working on there?
Yeah, that's a great question, Jeff. It's actually a kind of a new inquiry that we're making at the Center for Real Estate in the lab, and the built environment transition. We are seeing some meta trends or mega trends that are impacting the built environment. Some really big ones, and these will be familiar to your listeners: climate change, breakthroughs in science and technology. Sociogeographic trends, for example, hybrid work, which is really about the people. It's not the built environment responds to these kind of social changes that are happening. And we think, and by the way, those are just kind of three big ideas. There are other things going on, but we think this is going to cause, as my colleague, Professor Dennis Frenchman says, an epic reordering of the planet. Now, there might be a little hyperbole in there, but on the other hand, there's going to be a significant kind of reordering of the built environment and the various aspects that we all work in.
That makes a lot of sense. I mean, it's when I think of built environment, right, coming from an architecture background, of course, in my past, we would be designing things. We'd be designing the built environment, but you could never do that in a vacuum because it has an impact on the people, has an impact on the planet, of course, all of these things that we talk about. So it makes sense that that's a two-way street, or even, multiple different avenues there. So when you think about the three that you named off and beyond, what's going to have the biggest impact, or are you even measuring in terms of relative scale?
Oh, yeah. Great question. So I defer to some other research that's been done. We've done some research on it at MIT, but let me throw some numbers out to you, and people can follow up. You can Google some of this stuff. McKinsey has been writing about this. Fifth Wall, a big VC, has been talking about some of these elements. There was a recent work from home and office report from I think some researchers from Harvard and one of the other colleges. But let me give you some numbers. The retrofitting the existing energy and land use infrastructure, which would include real estate, but retrofitting that to net zero is expected to trigger $275 trillion in spending through 2050. So that's with a T. Even if McKinsey is off by 100%, it's still a huge number. So that would be net zero retrofitting kind of our world for net zero. Now, Greg Smithies from Fifth Wall has said that estimates that existing commercial buildings might require anywhere from 18 to $36 trillion to decarbonize. So is that a subset of that big number? Yeah, probably by some measures. The other one from that Harvard report on the impact of remote work on U.S. commercial office property is estimated to cause a destruction of value of $413 billion. That's with a B, fortunately. So when you start talking about those numbers, and there are a couple of other ones, and so we think there could be a $350 trillion opportunity, whether you are decarbonizing, whether you're repurposing, whether you're building new, whether you're working on old. I actually think the retrofit part is the most intriguing. Maybe you would too as an architect. So those are the kinds of numbers that we're looking at. So if you're a real estate developer, or if you're an occupier, or if you're a startup, Shadow is deep into the early stage as we are in some things as well with startups and founders and VC. This is going to be an immense change to our world in our lifetime, I think, is the key takeaway.
Yeah, I mean, you're naming off, numbers with T's and B's. And, I'm thinking, I'm no economist, right? I'm just this guy that got a calculator and 10 fingers. That sounds to me like numbers that are greater than the GDP of many nations on the planet.
Yes.
And you're simply talking about transition. You're simply talking about how this is going to change. That's really amazing. What do you see? You're focused on real estate. So where do you see the biggest focus in these areas, maybe early on?
Yeah, great question, because it's going to take in our lifetime, So this is not a let's fix it this year issue.
Exactly. Yeah.
So I'll mention that the center has this really great lens on real estate, because we're within the School of Architecture and Planning, not in the business school, like a lot of other programs. Now, being in the business school is a great place to be as well. And we do the hardcore finance and the economics. But to be together with the architects and the planners, and the media lab, as I mentioned, is also part of our school within MIT. So we get this holistic view of what's happening. And what that means is that we don't just look at the building. We really look at context, cities, transit, infrastructure, the people. So there are all of these, as you and I both know now, that the real estate industry can't just look at buildings anymore. We have to look at the whole thing. So to answer your question, then, I think that climate is probably the most pressing. It all seems to be connected to climate. And so when you look at demographic shifts and migratory kind of global migration, if you're looking at those sociogeographic, often that's related to climate. And if you're looking at science and technology, often that's related to climate. So I think the alarms have been sounded. This has been percolating. And it just seems to me, and I don't know, maybe you have a different perspective, but it seems to me that in the last couple of years, just recently, the alarm bells are really loud. Right. About if we don't do something, we might really be in a jam.
Right.
Yeah. So I think the climate, to answer your question, I think climate, the center's doing some work on how do we retrofit? Is there some kind of standard way that we can retrofit and then determine value? Because it does add value, but if you don't have data, you can't prove it to the industry. So, you have these early adopters that are kind of flying without a net. That's why I think climate is going to be the key thing.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. I mean, like you said, many of these things, or all of these things, they're intertwined. Right? You can't separate them from each other. So it makes sense that would be maybe the big driver. And when we talk about innovation, as you mentioned, Shadow Ventures has a number of portfolio companies that are focused on, we would typically say, on sustainability, but we're talking about climate, right? And so I think it makes sense to think that a lot of the innovation that needs to happen is going to be focused in that direction. Do you, as you look out across the landscape, do you see anything, whether it's in-house at MIT or beyond, that maybe other people are investing in or researching? Do you see anything that excites you in this realm?
Yeah, a lot of it excites me. Probably because I'm a technology optimist. I think that we can, and maybe it's because I'm at MIT, where It's not always the answer, but I think there are solutions through technology that we can really maybe take the edge off or win the race, win the battle. One area, so you mentioned climate and sustainability, and sometimes people use resiliency. Those are all good terms. What's interesting, though, is these emerging kind of subcategories. So when you talk about climate, you can talk about decarbonization, which is an interesting category. Scope 1, Scope 2, Scope 3. So if you're a startup or a VC, are you interested in helping buildings reduce their energy consumption, sort of a Scope 1? Are you interested in helping the grid and the generation of power in new, innovative ways? Maybe you invest in kind of modular micronuclear, possibly, just as an example. That's sort of a Scope 2. And a Scope 3 might be, how are you tracing the carbon footprint of the wood that goes into the module that then gets converted into the part that goes into my building? How do we, so the Scope 3 is the hard one, right? How do we understand the kind of food chain of carbon? So that carbon area is interesting. There's a kind of an area of that where, what about carbon capture? I saw a great example. I don't know if it has an MIT connection, maybe it does, where they think they can capture carbon through the air handlers on the HVAC system.
Well, okay.
So how cool would that be? I mean, in Iceland, you've got this enormous multi-billion-dollar big vacuum cleaner that's sucking carbon out of the air, which is great. But what if we could incrementally kind of capture it out of the air when it's going through the building, which we already do anyway. We already move air around in buildings. So that's kind of exciting. It has a science element. It has a startup element. It has a carbon element. That's pretty neat. So anyway, those are, I'm kind of thinking of one other example I'll give you from MIT is using LiDAR to do sort of an MRI on a building to understand, because we really don't know how the buildings perform from a mechanical standpoint. As an architect, I'm sure you struggle with that. How do you go back and measure when there are no tools or sensors or anything in place? So rather than in an old building, right, you could go in and spend a bunch of money on sensors, but what if you could do a LiDAR scan like you put it in a big MRI machine at the hospital? So that's another neat one.
That to me is super interesting. We were talking before. In my graduate level pro practice class, I run it like a startup incubator, and so the students go through. They come, what's the problem that needs to be solved, et cetera, business plan, and then we pitch it as Shark Tank at the end. And a couple of years ago, a student was focused on existing, sometimes maybe historic buildings, but their idea was creating a dashboard that required a lot of sensors, right? As you said. And so that idea of the LiDAR doing that MRI type scan, I think is fascinating. Maybe that would have been the next iteration of their idea had they continued that project beyond the class.
And you can scan inside and outside. There's another company that I met with that does LiDAR. You walk around on the inside of the building, and there are other methods to do this, but it's getting so much faster and cheaper. And even not to discount sensors, because sensors are getting down to pennies a piece. So you could just put them all over the building. And now in a way that we weren't able to do when they were $100 a piece or $50 a piece.
Sure. Yeah, but I think that's a good point too. As we think about innovation and we're going where we're going here, being able to utilize these things in some practical, the vacuum in Iceland versus the HVAC system in my building, right? Being able to develop some module that's repeatable, that's easily repeatable and usable. I think that's going to move the needle for us. This is a fascinating conversation. If you're out there watching this, maybe in the future or listening to this now, these are the types of conversations that we want to have here with Shadow Shorts. And if you want more conversations like this, we've got an event coming up. It'll be the 7th annual for Shadow Ventures. It's called Shadow Summit. It'll be in Atlanta, October 24th through 26th. And these are the exact kinds of conversations that we will have there. This is not a conference that you're going to go to and get sort of this superfluous level conversations about sustainability, et cetera. We go deep. One of my colleagues, Ian, said that's what's unique about this conference is every single one of these conversations is basically geeking out on a topic, and that's fantastic. I love that. Our CEO, KP Reddy, said that Shadow Summit 2023 will be a recap of everything that's happened in terms of innovation in the built environment and a preview of what will happen, what you need to plan for, what you need to budget for as you look at innovation in the built environment for 2024. So if you want more information, we're constantly updating the site now, shadowsummit.com. Schedule will be out, speakers will be out very, very soon. So go to shadowsummit.com to find more information about that. Steve, if people want to know specifically about what's going on in your area at MIT or anything else that you're working on, where should they go? How do they contact you?
A couple of resources. One would be the MIT Center for Real Estate website, which is cre.mit.edu. Sign up for the newsletter that we send out every month that gives updates on the research from the various labs. I think that's a great resource. The other possible resource is the Sensible City Lab within the School of Architecture and Planning, also the Media Lab website. And actually, the School of Architecture and Planning has their own newsletter about what's happening throughout the MIT community related to the built environment. So any of those would be good resources. I think the Center for Real Estate is probably the one that aggregates the most relevant and useful information for people in the industry.
Sure, that's great. This is another one of those conversations that I would love to continue this for about another hour, but it's called Shadow Short, so we've got to wrap it up.
Totally understood, but glad to come back anytime.
Absolutely. I'm going to take you up on that. I really appreciate you being here. So thank you to all of you out there that are watching this or listening to this. This has been Shadow Shorts with Steve Weikal, Industry Chair of the Real Estate Transformation Lab at MIT. My name is Jeff Echols. I am a Senior Advisor and the Head of Marketing at Shadow Partners. So we'll see you tomorrow with another Shadow Short. And until then, have a great day. Steve, thanks a lot. Really appreciate you for this. And let's talk again soon, everybody.